Today we have David Smith, the chairman of Bridge African Business Alliance. Thank you for your time. Your work focuses on African diaspora and the continent. Tell us more about that.
Oh, it's a fabulous subject. The diversity that we enjoy in the African community in the UK is very, very wide. But in the same way that it is wide, it is very fragmented. There have been occasions when I've introduced people from different parts of the UK to each other to find that they come from neighbouring villages. And therefore, what we are doing is trying to put some cohesion into the business leadership of the diaspora to enable Africans to take their true role in the development of their country and in the development of their continent. I find, for instance, that there are many advantages that people living in the UK have that are not available to people living in the home country. In some cases, not available to them living in other countries around the developed world. And therefore, the advantage that the diaspora enjoy here is quite phenomenal.
So David, how did this business start?
Well, it was a combination of factors, really. We began to understand some of the difficulties, and my friend came to me and he said, David, we don't have a Chamber of Commerce for Africans in the UK. Now, during this period, I was flying regularly to Uganda, to Kenya, to Rwanda, and looking at how those three countries operated as three completely different states, although joined in the East African community. And Rwanda I loved. It was so different in so many ways, such a rich history, and such tremendous difficulties that the people there have had to overcome. For me, it was about Africa as I would like to see it. Africa where people are productive, where people are working together, despite whatever difficulties, and beginning to address the opportunity that they have as a whole, rather than as independent parts. The cleanliness, the law against plastic bags, what an innovation that was. I was a bit worried about my duty-free at one stage, but having been through that, I was very clear that many of the things being done in Rwanda are a guide for other countries in Africa. I think beyond that, we've got to look at how there is an influence from people living outside on what is happening. And I've come to the conclusion that the village is not going to change by itself. It needs people who know that village, who love that village, to go back to that village and bring the positive influences that they have uncovered elsewhere, in the continent or outside of the continent. And that we need to look at how those communities grow. And if you look at the development of Rwanda, the government have pushed investors and funders into developing not just the city, but also some of the rural areas to make a difference there.
What do you think is the challenge for Africa?
Oh, there are many. But I think when it comes down to it, Africa is at a bit of a crossroads at the moment. It's had the first sort of attempt at independence from colonial rule. It's had the difficulties of various political regimes. It's had the backward and forward of change. Some of it has been good, some of it has not. And there are people who now have a role to play in how Africa goes forward. And I would like to lay the responsibility for that very clearly at the door of people in the diaspora. I was talking about it with a friend the other day, and we were talking about how does a country change its profile? How does it engage with the people it needs to engage with? And fundamentally, it has to say we're open for business. Not just that we're open for business, but we're here and we're ready and we're interested in everything to do with agriculture, everything to do with manufacturing, everything to do with mining, with processing, with ICT. Whatever the targets of that particular country. In the UK, for example, that country should be engaging with the UK industry, but it's not happening. There may be a trade mission where half a dozen or a dozen or maybe 20 UK companies go to Rwanda or to Cameroon or to Nigeria, or maybe all three countries on the same trip. And you then say, well, what relationships are really being established? And yet, in the UK, we have 5.5 million potential trade ambassadors for Africa. But that doorway is not open. No one in the diaspora is saying, look, here we are, we're ready to do business with the UK, and we want to engage with UK businesses that will come and support our development in whichever country I come from. Now that, I think, is going to be the real challenge for Africa. I think I mentioned earlier that the village isn't going to change by itself, and I was beginning to allude to this. It needs planning. It needs careful thought. It needs people to come down and say, we're going to create a new mining program in our country. We've not mined any of the resources that we have. We need experts to come and show us how to do it 21st century style, not 18th century style. We need to look at the very best technology that is available to bring the internet to the wide open spaces of Africa. And you can only do that by engaging with the best technology providers in the world. Some of them will be here, some of them will be in America, some of them will be in Europe, some of them will be in Japan and China, some of them will be in India. But actually, in every country, there's an opportunity to do something today by getting together with people who are passionate about the things that you're passionate about, be that the internet, the extraction of copper, the development of cotton, the manufacturing of rubber. Whatever it is that Africa wants to engage with, its diaspora needs to put its arm to the wheel and to turn that wheel very, very hard.
Before we go further, and maybe for our audience, give us some example of particular projects that you have accomplished.
Well, there are times when I think that the whole task of bringing the community together is a little like herding cats. So when we have a successful meeting, I feel that we've accomplished quite a lot. And by that I mean bringing people together from 10 or 12 or 15 different countries into one location in London or in Manchester or in Peterborough or in Oxford, where they begin to get to grips with some of the issues that they're facing in terms of bringing business back to Africa. Clearly the work that we've done with Parry Building Products in the West Midlands is an example. Their products are now sold in 60 countries around the world, but actually they aren't very well known here in the UK, and the opportunity to set up a business building houses is a very profitable opportunity in many African countries, and therefore I would say that as a starting point that's a considerable accomplishment. We've had businesses set up in Somalia, we've had businesses set up in Uganda and Tanzania. In Kenya they use that technology to build 2,000 houses. Now what we're doing is bringing people together to understand that that is an opportunity. And that, I think, is an important part of what we've accomplished. Working with the Nigerian community, We've actually been part of conferences that have got 500-600 people together. And when you're bringing ministers and state governors and people of influence here in the UK together to start addressing some of those issues, you're making strides, and that's the way I would describe our accomplishments.
You talk about investments. Are there specific areas in which you are focusing on?
There is one prime area that we focus on. We focus on our members. So we have a gentleman from Edinburgh who's brought us projects in agriculture, infrastructure, power, engineering, and for him we've introduced technology, finance, partnership, and that gives a bit of a range. At the same time, we're working with a major UK brand. They have a facility in Ethiopia that they're bringing forward, and their products will apply across the whole of Africa because it's footwear. Now, we don't determine where we focus. Our members determine where we focus. So we're looking at what they want to do. It's not us saying, oh, you must build houses. There is a need to build houses, and we have technology that can be applied there. There's a need for a tremendous amount of activity. I mean, one of our members specialises in education. They've built 28 secondary schools in Uganda in the last 8 years. And when you think there are 1,000 kids in each of those schools, you have to ask why that model is not being transferred to Gabon, to Ghana, to Mozambique, but their focus is Uganda.
You talk about Uganda and East Africa, and some people might say your organization is centered and looks at West Africa. Why have you not moved to other parts of Africa? Any reason?
No reason at all. I mean, we have one member from Algeria, and we concentrate on Algeria as far as that's concerned. We have an increasing number from Zimbabwe. And I think up until just before Christmas, not many people were looking at imminent investment in Zimbabwe, recognizing that it needed a lot of political and developmental change. But now that that has happened, the interest is very, very high. So the impressions are wrong. The impressions are a reflection of what we're doing, not a reflection of what we want to do. I am disappointed that we haven't had more members from Kenya. We've had a few. We have a very interesting conversation going on at the moment, which will take us into property development, agriculture, and a certain amount of solar power in Kenya. But I can't force those conversations to the front. Those conversations come at their own speed. And so what I'm looking at is what people want to do, because they're moved to drive their own businesses or drive businesses that will impact positively on their communities.
Business is about research to better know and come up with a clear business case and opportunities. Where do you find gaps and lacking in Africa?
Wow. So many gaps, so many opportunities. I travelled to Ghana the year before last with a gentleman whose background is, he's Australian, he's worked in the Far East, in Malaysia, and he's now focused on Africa. We couldn't walk down the street with him not coming up with 3 or 4 ideas of what he wanted to do. I remember I was waiting for a meeting with a governor in a Nigerian state, and there were masses and masses of broken down cars sitting on the campus that was the government offices of that particular state. And I was thinking to myself, well, some of these cars are broken at the front and some of them are broken at the back. Why can't we set up a breaker's yard? Why can't we take the parts that are still good and recycle those parts and take value out of these wrecks and apply them back into the community and into the industry that is Nigeria? And then it takes someone to do that. It takes someone with the desire to set up that factory, to set up that database, to set up that website, that phone app. And that idea is springing into several different layers of operation, from someone who might provide the car crushing plant, £100,000, to someone who's going to engineer the website and the telephone app, to the packaging and delivery services that would enable that to happen. It'd be very difficult for one person to do all of that by themselves. But if you had a spare $300,000 or $400,000 lying around, you could probably do it. So the opportunities are huge. And I think that what I enjoy is talking to people who are actually working on practical things they're doing. Last Thursday, we had a meeting with a company from Huddersfield. They work extensively in Africa. We're looking at a project in South Sudan, and they came with the technology, they came with the answers to many of the questions that the entrepreneur who's pushing that project forward didn't know. So the combination of local knowledge, I know there is a need for this, combined with 21st century technology and the experience of having done it several times before, come together to create a new industry. And that industry in that particular country would reduce their import bill and increase employment. So many opportunities to be looked at.
With all that, there must be some challenges for sure in doing business. What are they on your side?
The challenges for us are recognising the opportunity here in the UK. We have 5.5 million Africans in the UK. They've all come from different places. Some of them are related, some of them don't know they're related. Within a community, take Birmingham for example, there are many hundreds of thousands of people from Africa. But the cohesion in bringing together business leaders, finding solutions to particular problems is quite slow. And therefore the challenge here is to mobilise the power of the diaspora in the UK and to bring that into meaningful business. Once you have someone who knows the local terrain and understands the regulatory authority in which they're going to be operating, and you have someone who understands the technology that is going to be brought, and you can link that with a financial commitment from an Africa-friendly investor, you have the bones of a deal, but you've still got to make the chemistry work. And part of making that chemistry work comes from getting people together, getting them to understand each other, getting them to recognise where there are areas where they can have confidence in what someone else does, and then through that building trust between people who might end up going on to work together. This morning I had a call from Zambia, from a Nigerian who's working with a Zambian from Glasgow to put together a project that I'm speaking to American financiers about. And that's the jigsaw that I'm working on. It's really about how do we put those things together. And there is another major project that we're looking at, which is to do with a railway that might link Dakar in Senegal with Yaoundé in Cameroon, connecting all the coastal capitals and economic centres along the way. So about 5,500 kilometres of high-speed railway track. Some bishop from Malawi introduced me to a financier from Zimbabwe, who introduced me to a family office from South Africa to enable a conversation to start about a project being brought forward by a Nigerian professor. That's the power of the diaspora, that ability to interact on a Pan-African basis for the benefit of the whole continent.
David, thank you very much for talking to us.
I'm very glad to do so. Thank you.
Thank you.